Thank you, Adam, and thank you to Los Angeles Film Forum for continuing to host us and support us all these years. This is our 10th edition, so we're very happy that we've been around this long at this point. And we keep getting great work, so we keep thinking, are we going to stop? Is it the end of the Festival of Inappropriation? And then we get more good stuff, and we're like, I guess we'll keep going. So basically, how many people have been to the Festival of Inappropriation before? Okay, good number of people. Thank you for coming back. For those of you who haven't been before, just to tell you briefly kind of how we go about this, it's an open call every year. The only requirements are that the films be 20 minutes or less, that they incorporate some kind of pre-existing sound or image that can also include original material as well, and that it has to be experimental, and have some kind of interesting concept. We're very open, but of course we are programming for this audience. This is our primary audience, although the show does travel after this. So I think we have gotten everything, from supercuts to digital composites and, everything in between. And sometimes we have a couple of filmmakers who are return filmmakers who come back again and again, and we love their work and we keep programming it. And then we also have filmmakers we've never heard of, and even one who I'm not sure who she is, and maybe she's even here. She's very mysterious. I'm not sure who this person is, but she actually said that she saw the Festival of Inappropriation and was inspired by it, and then made the film that which is Drive with Persephone, which I think is a really fantastic film. Yeah. So maybe Greg will say a little more about this program.
Yeah. Let's see. Adam is spot on when he says that this really is a vital practice. It's a vital area of experimental film practice. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this festival was perhaps the first, or one of the first of its kind, if not the first, among the first of its kind, to really showcase exclusively found footage and found media, film, video, and moving image work. And I think for good reason, we need to have a space for this kind of work, because as the media landscape continues to emerge, continues to burgeon, and continues to sort of expand, we are constantly inundated with images and media that these kinds of films allow us to see in a new light. These are, I think, our mutual approach to the curating of this festival is really to find works that compel us to think again about the kinds of images and sounds that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's very clear in the program tonight. You'll probably recognize some of the sources, not the sources themselves, but the types of sources. In other cases, you may not. So it could be a totally new experience for you. But I do hope that some of these films, one of these films, if not all of these films, give you the opportunity to think deeply about the media that we experience all the time. Yeah.
So thank you for coming, and we will have a Q&A just with us afterwards. If you want to talk about the films, we'd love to hear your thoughts and answer any questions you might have. So enjoy the show.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep, thank you. So if anyone has any comments or questions or thoughts, we're happy to.
Yeah, and it can be about anything, films, how we curate, all that kind of stuff.
So how many entries do you get with this kind of thing?
I think we got...
it's usually around 300.
Yeah, but somewhere between 250 and 300 each year.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we regularly get.
This year was close to 3.
Close to 3.
Yeah.
How many of what we saw were return people?
So the last one, Soda Jerk, was returned. Jennifer Proctor.
Oh, that's true. Jennifer Proctor.
Gerard
Rivera and Penny Lane.
And Penny Lane. Yeah, I think
that's unusual. I think actually 4 in the same show. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not always the case, but yeah, really strong pieces from them.
Yeah, and we actually curated 2 programs out of this round. So a second program is the 11th edition will be
From the same batch.
Yeah, from the same batch of submissions.
Yeah, we felt like we got enough strong stuff this time that we wanted to do 2 programs.
Can you talk in depth about normal appearances and acting erratically?
Depends on what you mean by talk about in depth.
How in depth?
Like what's your question about them?
Well, I guess normal appearances, I want to hear more about like the connections with all the behavioral elements and like the use of clothing and like the sound design of that, and like what you think it articulates. And then with acting erratically, just more on the way it utilizes kind of like a mix of found footage to express its points in a way that's like unique in relation to the others and very politically, I mean, a lot of them are politically charged, but it comes at it with like a different angle than the others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that acting erratically is more sort of directly political than a lot of the stuff we program generally. But we liked it for that reason to some degree. I mean, I think that it's doing political work, but in a very conceptual way, right? Through the sort of idea of the erratic, which was something that I hadn't known about or thought about before. And so what I like about that piece, I don't know if this answers a question about, a larger question, but just in the way that it's sort of able to connect disparate things to create these kind of metaphors, but also all these different kinds of bodily movements and frame them in such a way that I think made me at least rethink sort of the way that we allow bodies to move in particular spaces. And I liked that as a sort of way into this question of, how people are being treated right now, right? Particularly Black people and Black women. So those were my thoughts on that one, at least in the broad sense. In terms of normal appearances, I actually felt like this year was interestingly a year of kind of the interesting supercut.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the films, and this is not usual for us, we usually don't program a lot of supercuts because they are kind of...
Please define a supercut.
Well, so, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, what's a supercut? But this idea that you take, similar instances of the same thing, either from a bunch of different texts or potentially one text and just kind of cut out everything else, right? So you could argue that normal appearances, only the dead... what are the other ones in this batch?
Just takes a little soap and water.
Yeah, just a little soap and water, right, yeah. So, all of those are sort of supercuts in the sense that they are picking one thing and kind of mining it and, sort of condensing all of these similar instances. But I didn't feel bad this year about programming a bunch of supercuts because they each do something interesting with it, right? That isn't just you're kind of like, oh, isn't this funny that, there's such a common trope in this. So... with normal appearances, what I particularly like is what she did with the sound, right? If it had just been the original sound, I don't think it would have been interesting. But it becomes incredibly spooky, with just sort of the footsteps and the ambient sound, which isn't the original, and, the sort of emphasis on the small gestures. I think particularly for me, just now watching it right after acting erratically, spoke to two different ways of women being in the world, right? And I guess you're talking about two very different groups of women and very different spaces, but still the sort of control and scripting or attempted scripting of bodily movement. So that's what I like about that pairing. So since you raised the question of those two, those are my thoughts.
Yeah. I have a few things to say about those two works and about supercuts generally. I mean, the internet is kind of rife with supercuts. I mean, you can go onto YouTube and find lots of sort of DIY supercut films. But so I think for a film like that to make it into our program, it really does need to do what it does exceptionally well. And with films like Normal Appearances, obvious. I mean, I'm probably stating the obvious, but what's most interesting about the film to me is how it really homes in on this this sort of characteristic of reality television, both normal appearances and Only the Dead, which is that everything is canned. Everything is completely sort of predetermined. And everything is, it's essentially the same show over and over again. And that's not just about the sort of the medium itself. It's about sort of where sort of we as human beings are sort of learning our social kind of our social codes, and so I think those films do a particularly good job at sort of pointing up the kind of the overdetermination of all of the ways that we interact with people. As far as acting erratically, I mean, appropriation actually has a pretty long history in political cinema, in militant documentary in particular, and so on certain levels, acting erratically is sort of a straight ahead political documentary. But what's so interesting about acting erratically is the way that it uses its appropriated elements not really to illustrate what's being said on the level of sound. The image of the glacier or the image of a rock split down the middle, those are really open sort of symbols. They work sort of on a second level from the script, as it were, and so it creates all kinds of space for thought, and for thinking together with the thinking that the film is doing about sort of the social categorization and coding of certain kinds of behaviors. So I just think, it's a brilliant film actually for that reason. Yeah.
Yes.
So 10 years, I guess. Looking back, is there a set of sort of theoretical questions that you started with that are still with you, or is there any way you can sort of, are there any arcs over this where you sort of had a change of thought about found footage, more theoretically?
She's the theorist right there.
I guess. I mean, and I'm the one who's been here since the beginning, so I guess that's on me. I mean, yes, I've spent the past 10 years basically thinking about found footage. That's what my work has been on, my writing, generally. It's hard to say. I mean, it's hard to say in terms of the festival. I mean, for me, I've been theorizing found footage more broadly. It all certainly applies to the festival, but I wouldn't say that I've really tried to theorize all of the festival films kind of as a whole, because we really attempted to make it as diverse as possible, right? I mean, choose films that we actually think are genuinely good, but not just the same thing over and over again, right? So we've really tried to, pick a bunch of different styles every time, different approaches, different tones. So it's hard for me to say that there's any, specific arcs in that sense. I mean, the questions I've been thinking about a lot personally in my work is about the ethics of found footage and of appropriation, and certainly in some of this footage, right? I think there are ethical questions, like for instance, Only the Dead, right? I mean, I find that film really funny on the one hand, like it's just the repetition of dead, it gets funny. And then the slight variations make it even more ridiculous. And yet, like, you are actually looking at actual dead hands and feet and, like, blurred bodies, right? They're essentially kind of tiny snippets of snuff films, right? I mean, sure, they're already dead. It's not that they're being killed. But, there's an ethical question there. And so there's a lot of films that, for me, raise those questions. I don't think we've ever programmed anything that I thought was overtly and, sort of beyond the pale in terms of ethics, because I don't think we would. And we've certainly gotten stuff that I did think was exploitative. But that's certainly a question that I've asked of all of the films. I don't know. I mean, you've been with the festival. How many years have you been programming now?
Six.
So So what are some of the overarching things
I
you
mean,
thought about?
I'm sure I've learned a lot about appropriation film and appropriation generally by working with Jaimie, actually, and Lauren for that matter. I think what's interesting to me about appropriation is its history, its art history, essentially. It's not that these aren't the first people, these last 10 years are not the first sort of appropriation films in history, obviously not. And appropriation is probably as old as cinema, really. But I'm really interested in the way that the films communicate with art in other areas and other media. I think that the best of the works that we get, that we're able to program, for me, are the ones that are aware in some way of their place in a broader sort of tradition of appropriation in visual art. And I think that to make appropriation film now is really, I think what distinguishes appropriation works of interest and appropriation works that are of less interest is that self-awareness, actually, now, that kind of self-consciousness, in a way, because of the media saturation of our current moment. It seems almost irresponsible not to sort of be aware of the tradition behind your work in that sense. The three of us come at things very differently. I mean, I honestly, it's remarkable that we've made it this far because we are three really different personalities in terms of like curatorial sensibilities, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, probably in some of the diversity of the program, you can tell like that. I mean, we each had our ones that we were like, we're not going to do this without this film.
Right.
I mean, there were some that we agreed on completely, and then others that were a negotiation, certainly.
For sure, and it's too bad that Lauren couldn't be here. I think she adds a certain dimension to the festival. She's really, really interested in social media and in participatory media, and she's really interested in the works that sort of tap into that vein of appropriation work. So, yeah.
Can you talk about the symbolism? I was trying to figure out like the farm elements in Drive with Persephone.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, actually. I mean, to me, I was thinking about it as in terms of the myth of Persephone and, that she eats the apple, right? And then there's, when Persephone is in Hades, it's winter, right? Everything is barren. So sort of the harvest is the moment when she has to give up her child, right? So that's how I read that imagery, because I'd sort of, there's such strong imagery in the film that I had sort of not really thought about that actually until watching it just now. But yeah, that's how I read it, is that it's a sort of, and then, I don't know, that reveal of the child sleeping there, I don't know, kind of reinforces that for me, the sense of, that there's this moment of being able to protect your child and yet knowing that that's not going to last. I find that film really powerful. I don't know how other people reacted to that one, but that's the one who she's I don't know if she's a first-time filmmaker, but it sort of sounded like she was. I think she said it was her first film.
Maybe. Is she in the audience? Is Mi Foy? Is she here? No. Okay.
I don't know who she is, but
she's a mystery to us.
Yeah. So I don't know. I found that film really beautiful in terms of taking that myth and. Just using these, I didn't even know about these driving videos. I didn't know that was a thing, but apparently it is. And so, the way that piece moves, I think, is really unexpected, or it certainly was for me. I didn't see where it was going at all the first time I watched it.
Yeah. Maya.
I just have a comment. Since there was also a question about what is this overarching theme throughout these years. I haven't been to all of the festivals, but I've been to quite a few. And when I saw the derivation of the meaning of lifetime, it struck me like I was really I stopped with this one. And I felt like, this whole festival is so much about the audience engagement and what it elicits from the audience, what kind of experience, and perhaps like what kind of modes of attention, what it brings into your own memory. It's such a subjective engagement with what's on screen, and this is why I love this festival so much. And I was really surprised at first with this particular piece, because I was looking at it and at some point I couldn't look at it anymore. And then I started looking at a corner, and then I realized, oh, there is a change, but I can't identify it and I can't perceive it. And so I feel like it almost speaks as a metaphor for this whole festival, because it really makes you engage with your own perception,
And attention, I like the word, yeah.
In a very attentive way. I really love.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this for us.
Thank you. I love that piece. That was one of my favorite of the batch this year, actually. And it wasn't unanimously favorite. I mean, it wasn't a unanimous favorite among the three of us, but
yeah, I think Lauren was on the fence on that.
Yeah. I'm actually curious to know how long it took people to figure out that bodies were disappearing. I mean, did people notice within seconds, or did it take minutes? Minutes.
Yeah.
Almost.
Till the end.
It seemed to get faster at the end.
It does.
It
Well,
does.
it's
It does
because
get
it's-
faster.
Yeah.
Well, it's the mean lifetime, right? Because people
right.
die more towards the end of life, right? So at the end, it speeds up. So-
Yeah.
But at that point, I couldn't really tell. Like, I almost felt as
Yeah.
if it made me question the time of what was happening in a way that was
That-
engaged that subjectivity.
Yeah.
I was watching it as a game to try to catch them as they disappeared.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
started.
Yeah.
I saw that one.
But that film condenses so many concepts, an historical concept as well. I mean, it's a photograph of a German summer camp from the year 1929, which would be sort of really at the end of Weimar. That is, everything's about to fall apart. And so suddenly, by the time you find out that bodies are disappearing, it's too late. It's too late. And then you see sort of the historical marker of that image, and then there are immediate references to the Holocaust and a whole bunch of other stuff, which is, I think, where some of the power of that piece.
And actually, that gives me an answer to Ari's question, which is that there's definitely an overarching theme of death. It's certainly in this program, but in many of the other programs. I mean, I think there's something about found footage and its provenance, coming from the past, of traces left behind, right? Where certainly not all of the films, but many of them touch on themes of loss and death and time disappearing and time irrecoverable and things like that. That's certainly very present.
Yeah.
Any
Okay.
last questions? Well, thank you all so much for coming, and we hope we will see you again at the
Yeah.
festival in the future.
Come back.